Hey guys, it's John here from Sonic Drive Studio. I hope you're all doing well. Deftones, a great band with a very cool and unique sound. So let's try to sound like Deftones in this video today. About 1.5 years ago or so, I already did an attempt at this, but today I want to try it again to see if we can get even closer to that sort of classic Deftones sound. And the sound that I want to recreate today is basically a sort of blend between the Around the Fur record and the White Pony album. Now for the main tone, I want to use my Marshall JMP-1 preamp, which is in the rack under my desk over there. And that's also what Stephen Carpenter used back in the day from the White Pony record on for a bunch of records. And he even has gone back to using that today. So that's an important part of the DNA of Stephen Carpenter's tone, basically. However, that amplifier is not available anymore. You can't buy it anymore new because they don't make it anymore. So we're also going to try to get his tone using my Marshall JVM410H high gain amplifier head, since these are still available right now. Now before we go further, let's go ahead and take a listen to the riffs that I've come up with, heavily inspired by Deftones of course. And of course I used my ESP Ltd SC20 Stephen Carpenter signature model, the 6-string model in fact, with the Seymour Duncan JB pickup in the bridge, which is an awesome guitar. Let's go ahead and take a listen right now. Alright, that sounded pretty good, right? Perhaps not exactly the same as those records, of course, but still pretty similar. So for that tone, I played this guitar, the ESP Ltd SC20 Stephen Carpenter signature model, the neck through one, the green one with the Seymour Duncan JB in the bridge. And this guitar is tuned to drop C, by the way, which is the tuning that they used on the White Pony record. And I played this guitar through the Marshall JMP-1 preamp, which, as I said, is under my desk in my rack over there. Nothing too crazy in terms of settings. I'm going into the OD2 channel with the bass shift off. Gain was set to 17, bass to 2, mids to -1, treble to 1, and presence to 0. Probably not the exact same settings as Steph used back in the day. In fact, I know for sure that these are not the exact same settings because I actually talked to Steph about it, but more on that in a minute. Anyway, so from the output of the JMP-1, we're going into the effects return of the Marshall JVM410H amplifier. So we're using this as the power amplifier basically. But yeah, running that preamp through this amplifier worked out fine. And it's great because with this amplifier you can use the presence and resonance controls to shape the tone even further. Because in my previous video in which I tried to sound like Deftones, I used my JCM 2000 and that just had a deep switch and a presence control. So this one just gives me a little bit more tonal shaping options basically to control the top and bottom end. Now the JVM was fed into my RedSeven Amplification Amp Central reactive load of course, and then into a York audio cabinet from the MRSH 412 MV30 pack, which is actually based on the same cabinet that Stephen Carpenter used. And the exact file that I'm using is the Mix 01 file, which is a blend between a 121 and 57 mic. So like I said, it's the exact same cabinet that Stephen used, but I'm using a V30 speaker while he used a T75 speaker. More on that in a second. So I double tracked the guitars, I played it twice, and I panned the parts hard left and hard right. In the DAW I applied almost no post-processing, so no EQ because I really wanted to make these tones as raw and pure as possible. but I did apply a little low cut at around 85 Hz just to remove some low end rumble. Now let's take a quick listen to the isolated guitar parts. Cool! I really like the sound of that Marshall JMP-1 preamp. It's percussive, chunky with a nice mid-range. It just has a good presence in the mix, and it's definitely not oversaturated sounding, so the notes have plenty of definition. Now, did I use the exact same pieces of gear that Stefan himself used? No, I did not, but I just used what I have here in this studio, and I think that I got pretty close without post-processing. However, I did actually talk to Stefan himself a while ago, and he's actually a very, very nice guy. And he was really open about what gear he used and what gear he uses right now. So let me give you a very quick rundown of the gear that he used on the first 3 records. Now for the first Deftones record, the Adrenaline album, he used ADA MP1 preamps into the front of his Marshall JCM800 amplifiers. And for the second album, Around the Fur, he used those same ADA preamps, but this time into Marshall 9200 power amps. And for the White Pony record, he actually started to use the Marshall JMP-1 preamp, but this time into Marshall 100 power amps with EL34s. And up until the Diamond Eyes record, he used the same cabinets, which is the Marshall 4x12 cabinets loaded with Celestion T75 speakers. So he actually didn't start using V30 speakers at all until he started using the orange speakers on stage. But for all those older albums, they actually used the T75 speakers. Now, I personally like V30s a lot. I just really like how they sit in a mix. The T75s seem to work very well for Stefan, obviously because those records sound absolutely awesome, but I just got better results with V30s with my setup. And who knows how much processing Terry Date, who was the producer of those albums, applied to make those guitars sound like the way they sound on those albums. Those tones do sound kind of processed and cold and mechanical, and that sound really works well for those records. My mix for this video sounds a little bit warmer and less processed basically, especially on the guitars. Now since you can't buy the Marshall JMP-1 preamp anymore, at least not new, I also wanted to try to get this tone with the Marshall amp that they still make, so I wanted to use the Marshall JVM410H for that as well, just pure with this amplifier and no other preamps attached. And the JVM is basically the most modern and high gain amplifier that Marshall makes, so it makes sense to use this amplifier. So let's try those same riffs, but this time through the JVM, on the OD1 channel on the red mode, which is the high gain mode of that channel. Let's go ahead and take a listen to how that sounds right now. Cool, that sounded pretty good and not too far off actually. It's more saturated, more compressed and less dry sounding. It's still pretty chunky and obviously very high gain. This thing has a lot of gain on tap. But yeah, definitely more compressed and modern. Let's also take a listen to the isolated guitars. not bad. I love my Marshall JVM410H a lot. It's a very cool amplifier, very versatile, but definitely great for high gain modern tones. Now let's check out an A/B back-to-back comparison of the Marshall JMP-1 preamp into the effects return of the JVM versus the pure tone of the JVM itself. Let's see how different they sound back-to-back. Here we go. Cool. The JMP-1 definitely still holds up really well. It has a very cool and unique tone. It's a bit more articulate, crunchy, and sort of dry sounding, whereas the JVM sounds very saturated and a bit more bright and compressed. They still sound quite similar though, so it does kind of get that tone actually. So if you want to get that Deftones tone without having to buy a used JMP-1 and a separate power amp or anything like that, the JVM410H or 210, for example, would be a good bet. So did I come close to that legendary Deftones tone from the late 90s and early 2000s? Let me know in the comments down below. That's all for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons down below, as that really helps the channel out. I'd hugely appreciate that. And you can also follow Sonic Drive Studio on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys very soon. Cheers!